Don't stop me now, 'cause I'm almost
Hello and welcome
there.
to Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast dedicated to reviewing each and every one of the so-called Walt Disney animated classics in chronological order, trying to look at them on their own merits and putting aside our own nostalgia and the context in which they were made. My name is Ben, and joining me as always is my good friend Liam. Liam, which film are we on this week?
This week, Ben, we are taking a look at 2009's The Princess and the Frog, a somewhat loose adaptation of the classic Grimm's fairy tale The Frog Prince, brought to us by our old favourite duo, Musker and Clements.
What I particularly love about this is on the Wikipedia page, it says, directors of Disney's highly successful films The Little Mermaid, Aladdin and Hercules. After Hercules they directed Treasure Planet, but they've not mentioned that.
No, and this film very much felt like the new management at Disney trying to evoke the spirit of the Renaissance. In fact, I believe Musker and Clements had left Disney at this point, and it was John Lasseter who approached them and said, can we bring you back to do an old school Renaissance film? Because Renaissance was old school by 2009. And I know that we said Home on the Range was going to be our last 2D animated film. I've scrapped that. If you want to do 2D, you can do 2D, but you're also welcome to do a 3D animated film. They came back, went back to their fairy tale roots, and brought us our first traditionally 2D animated film since Home on the Range, and our last since.
Yeah, and as far as I can tell, Disney don't really have any plans to go back to this. They've done a couple of shorts and other bits and pieces, but yeah, the appetite does not seem to be there, and we will touch on perhaps some of the reasons for that as we go through this film. Now, as always, we're going to talk a little bit about the background of this film, the context in which it was made. We're going to go through the plot and give a refresher for those who haven't seen this film in a while, or maybe you've never seen The Princess and the Frog. We're going to talk about, of course, who the sexiest character in The Princess and the Frog is, and then make a decision as to whether it's worthy of making our own, rather more refined list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics.
So to start us off then, Ben, this film would have came out when you were barely an adult.
I'd argue I'm still barely an adult, but I'm just a lot older.
Had you came back to Disney by this point, and did you watch it when the film came out?
I remember my partner of the time going to watch this with their friends, and I think I decided to stay in Wetherspoons. Now, this was the last Disney film I've not seen at the cinema when it was out, because it was after this point I decided, right, from now on, this is a thing I'm going to commit to. I didn't see Raya at the cinema, but obviously it didn't get a cinematic release. But yeah.
You saw Winnie the Pooh at the cinema?
Oh yeah, well, look, I
mean, I did, but I just didn't expect that from you.
Okay, aside from this, and Winnie the Pooh and Raya, I've seen them all from Bolt. In answer to your question, Liam, no. How about you?
My first exposure to this film was actually through a friend of ours at university, which, to be fair, would have only been a couple of years after this film came out, but she was doing her dissertation on Disney films and how particularly the concept of dreams and wishes had evolved over the years. And while she was working on that, she introduced me to this film. And it probably would have been about 2011, I think I first saw this film. So not too far after it came out. But also since then, I've only seen it a couple of times since, so I was quite excited to come back to this and see how it holds up.
Without further ado then, let us dive into the plot of The Princess and the Frog. And as we're going into this film, I think it might be good to revisit our favourite bingo game. No, we're not going to be playing Sterling Holloway bingo, he's still dead. Instead, we can play classic Disney reference bingo, because, oh boy, there are a lot of references to classic Disney animated films in this film. It very much feels like a love letter to those classically animated films.
Now, you say a love letter. I think this is very much a tongue-in-cheek self-critique from Disney. So we're now at the start of what a lot of people like to refer to as the Disney revival. And alongside the commercial success, what I think really is the common element of the Disney revival is the almost self-deprecating look Disney takes at itself. And oh boy, do we start that with a bang, where Disney is literally opening with a storybook to two young girls telling them about wishing on a star. And first of all, it's very weird that the Frog Prince exists in this universe. I think overall it ends up making sense, but this is probably the first time where there is a Disney film in which the Grimm's stories exist in universe.
And listening to this story, as you say, we have two young girls. We have Charlotte LaBeouf, a very rich white girl who lives in a mansion in New Orleans. And she's being read this story by Eudora, who is her tailor slash childminder slash story reader, and her daughter Tiana. Both Tiana and Eudora are black, which is very significant for a number of reasons, which we'll come to, but not least because Tiana is our first black Disney princess and indeed black Disney protagonist. Now, I feel the character Charlotte, or she's sometimes called Lottie in this film, I kind of feel she is very much what you're saying about Disney being self-aware, and she's kind of a piss take of people who get a bit too caught up in the whole prince and princesses aspect of Disney.
Yeah, it's something I hadn't really noticed until watching this today, but by all measures, Lottie is someone who has everything you could ever want. She's rich, she's beautiful, she is kind. By some measures, she's never shown to be malicious or mean-spirited in the film. She is a friend of Tiana's, but she's obsessed with being a princess. And it is very much Disney saying, look, there's more to life than wishing on stars and wanting to be a princess. Grow up. Which is a little bit mean-spirited from the company that is basically responsible for that.
I think they're very much having their cake and eating it. They're saying, hey, life's not all about princesses. Also, we've made a princess film.
Yeah, it's not quite lampshading, but it is still taking the piss from Disney, I think.
And what we get in this scene is we kind of get our two character motivations, really. We see that Lottie, she's just enamoured with the idea of princes, whereas Tiana's very serious and she's not really into any of that. And Lottie's saying she'd kiss a million frogs to get a prince, and Tiana says she'll never kiss a frog. I bet that won't come up later. And then, Lottie pulls out this little, frog hood and sticks it on her pet, and it's like, oh, kiss it, it's a frog. And I'm like, wait, did Lottie, prepare that just to be a dick to Tiana? That's some impressive preparation to be an arse to your best friend.
To be fair, they all read the exact same story every night and have the exact same conversation afterwards.
That's true, but that's because Lottie insists on it.
But the point is after a year and a half of that, she's like, I know, I'll have a little frog hat for my cat. That was a difficult sentence to say.
This isn't relevant at all to my critique of the film, but often when characters in this film say Charlotte LaBeouf, I mishear it as Shia LaBeouf.
That would be a very different film. We just need to get to Shia LaBeouf before midnight so that he can kiss you and turn you into a prince.
I thought you were going to say, we need to get to Shia LaBeouf before midnight because he's mad. And we need to stop him.
I quite like this opening. It gives us a snapshot of this rather spoiled, prince-obsessed little girl to then contrast it against Tiana and her family as her and her mum head home. And we get this lovely transition from the neighbourhoods. We see them starting off surrounded by the large plantation manors, I think even, slowly transitioning to the more humble neighbourhoods of Tiana, her family, and the rest of the black population of New Orleans, telling us right away this is a story about race and about wealth.
I think this is handled superbly in this film. I think at no point do they shy away from the differences between these two groups of people in terms of socioeconomic status. I think it's very clear, but also I think they get a good balance of still making this a light-hearted children's film, because generally this is quite a light-hearted film. It doesn't lean too heavily into that aspect, and I think you're limited in how seriously you can address topics like racial inequality and poverty when you've also got, a jazz-playing alligator or whatever. So I really like the way they handle this. There's a particular moment we'll come to where I think the nuance of it is very good. But yeah, I like the visualization that the lifestyles of these two groups of people are very different.
And as we get back home, we also meet Tiana's father, James, I believe, who is a very hard-working man and has clearly instilled this in his daughter. We see a nice scene with them cooking gumbo together. There's a bit about Tiana being naturally talented, which I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with. She's worked at that. It's not a natural gift. particularly considering the film is so keen to really push that message about hard work. I just found this, well, maybe it's not what I'm reading it as, and it's just a father encouraging his daughter. But saying that, he does the complete opposite in a moment, because Tiana gets really excited when she sees the evening star and says, in Lottie's storybook, if you make a wish on the evening star, it's going to come true. And her dad turns to her and he says, you wish and you dream with all of your heart, but know that that star can only take you part of the way. You have to help it along with some hard work of your own. Which is basically the spirit of this film. I have a few problems with it, and the film sort of addresses it. But what we're getting is, again, that Disney self-awareness of saying, you can't just wish for something to happen, you have to work for it. Which I have a little bit of a problem with, because overwhelmingly that isn't the case. Hard work will not get you where you want to go. Hard work and a lot of good fortune and good luck are what is required. So I think I'm just going to say this at this point. This is very much a pro-American dream film. And I really felt that, as a society, we had moved away from the American dream and understood its flaws. This is 80 years after The Great Gatsby, 70 years after Of Mice and Men, and we're still saying, if you work hard, you can achieve anything, regardless of the lot you are dealt in life.
I also have mixed feelings about it. There's a case to say that it's a bit of a critique of that, and also it's an acknowledgement that some people in life get what they want just by wishing for it, and some people will have to work for it. And again, that's very much what we see with Lottie can just ask for something and her dad buys it straight away, whereas that's never going to be the case for Tiana. So I do think there's something nice here about Tiana's dad basically managing her expectations in terms of what she can expect from life. You said to me once that having the main message of your children's film be wishing doesn't solve your problems, you have to work hard whilst not losing focus of the things that really matter, is a great moral for a kids movie. But maybe it's not also the best moral to have for the first film where you've got a female black protagonist growing up in the 1920s, and the moral being you just need to work harder, because that's not what's holding Tiana back.
Yeah, and I think the film handles it fairly well, though I will say I think a different set of directors maybe would have handled it a little bit better, with a little bit more understanding. In fact, one thing that this reminded me of today watching this, strangely enough, was the response to a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests over the last 12 months, where a lot of mostly white parents were saying, we want to keep our children innocent. We don't want to have to discuss the horrors of racism with them. And a lot of black people responded and said, we have no choice but to discuss racism with our children. It's a privilege that you're allowed to give your children that innocence. And in a way, maybe that is the case with Tiana's father here. For me, as a white man, it's very easy for me to say, let children dream and let them wish upon stars. But he knows that the lot they are dealt in life simply by being black in the time they exist, she's going to have to work hard, and he has to instill that in her as soon as possible. Otherwise, her life will be even more difficult. And actually, there is a fair amount of nuance to that point, but I don't think the film addresses it as well as it needs to. Because another point about this scene is we're introduced to Tiana's dream, which is to own her own restaurant with her father. It's not her dream, it is her father's dream. What young girl knows what she wants to do in life without that guidance of her parents? And as you grow up and you move away from the influence of your parents, you might find your own dream. Yet when she is an adult, her dream is still to open her father's restaurant. And I do just find that a little odd that in a film that is very focused on the difference between a want and a need, our protagonist's main want is actually her father's dream.
I'm going to disagree, Liam. I actually really like Tiana's motivation, because I think it does originate from her father, but I think a lot of that comes from him encouraging her to love food and see the positive impact it has on people and on her community. And yes, that idea originates from her father, but I think there is some nuance to that, and the variation we get of that dream later on, that Tiana At the start of the film, Tiana's very focused on the physical owning a restaurant because I want to do this as a dedication to my dad. But towards the end of the film, that's still there, but there's a bit of a twist to it.
You know what? Without jumping ahead to the whole want versus need discussion of this film, I suppose it's kind of similar to Simba in that regard. Simba wants to be king without really understanding what that means.
And Tiana wants to be king as well.
Without really understanding what that means.
Yes. So we flash forwards. Tiana is now a 19-year-old. And as far as I can tell, she never sleeps. She comes home from having worked a waitressing night shift somewhere. She puts her tips in a jar, which she's got a whole drawer full of jars that she's saving up her tips.
The world's heaviest drawer.
She's saving up her tips towards the restaurant. Again, we see the photo of her father on her drawer. It's sort of heavily implied he died during World War One. And she then falls asleep on the bed and her alarm clock immediately goes off and she goes to her next job.
All accompanied by a fantastic opening number down in New Orleans. Very reminiscent of the opening of Beauty and the Beast, Belle, where we follow our protagonist through their hometown and meet the various locals and get a glimpse of life in this place, with the added bonuses of introducing us to our secondary protagonist and also our villain. And I think both of these introductions are done really well over this number. So to me, it's a very, very successful musical number. So let's talk about the music. We've got our setting of New Orleans. Jazz is in the air. Who better to embody the spirit of jazz, Ben, than our composer? Who did they get?
They got Randy Newman, probably most famous for You've Got a Friend in Me from Toy Story. Not the jazziest composition in the world.
Also the song Short People Are Terrible and Should Kill Themselves.
Wow.
Are you aware of short people?
No.
Oh, wow.
I assume he's excluding children.
Well, Randy Newman has a long and varied career before Toy Story. It's really Toy Story that brought him to the wider populace as just a composer for animated films. But before that, probably his most famous song is something called Short People, which is very tongue-in-cheek and sarcastic, but the lyrics are genuinely awful.
Now, personally, I actually really like the music in this film. I don't know if it's necessarily the best representation of New Orleans musically, but I think it works really well. I really like this opening number. I think it's incredibly efficient, as you say. Let's talk about the other characters we get in this sequence then. So Tiana's heading into town again. She gets the tram. There's some street performers walking past. Tiana has the same reaction I have to street performers, in that all she thinks is, they're in my way, stop being in my way, I'm not entertained. And as I say, we're introduced to several of the characters. Liam, shall we start with the arrival of Prince Naveen?
So we're informed via, I believe, a newspaper at first, and then later by Lottie, that the esteemed Prince Naveen of somewhere in Europe is arriving in New Orleans for Mardi Gras. And our first introduction of him is, I'm not sure if he's quite in disguise, but he's at least dressed down, and he's just kind of interacting with the people, playing his ukulele and enjoying the spirit of New Orleans, much to the chagrin of his manservant Lawrence. And I've got to say, I quite like Naveen. I think they get his character across very strongly right away. This is a free-spirited, fun-loving prince.
As you say, he's vaguely from Europe, so the country he's meant to be prince of is Maldonia, which I think is meant to be a portmanteau of Malta and Macedonia. He speaks Italian in parts throughout the film. I'm guessing they were vague because they were like, there's some issues with characters being from Europe in this time period, that particularly royal families, but also particularly, countries that were sort of devolving into fascism. So let's just brush all that under the carpet.
What an absolute minefield of a period of time to be setting your story in. You're just out of World War One. Fascism is on the rise across Europe, and also you're about 2 years away from the Great Depression. You have this small window where you can be like, right, this is okay to set a story in. Either side of this is just a no-go area. And as well as Prince Naveen then, we're also introduced to our villain of the piece, Dr. Facilier.
But how do you know he's the villain, Liam? He's not even had any dialogue yet.
I assume it's the dark bags under his eyes.
Yeah, and also his shadow doesn't follow his outline, which is an awesome character design. So we see...
But Peter Pan's shadow doesn't follow his character. Oh wait, he's the villain of the piece as well.
Yeah, he's a monster. If anything, he's worse than Facilier. No, that's a bit harsh.
I mean, Facilier doesn't do anything directly evil in the film. Peter Pan almost murders several people.
I mean, we'll come to that, but I think that might be pushing it.
Oh god, I forgot.
Yeah, he does quite a lot of bad stuff. So we're introduced to Dr. Facilier. He's basically a sort of con artist, turning his trade on the streets of predicting people's fortunes. We get a bit where there's a guy who's bald, so he blows this sort of magic powder on him, and the guy initially grows head hair, but then grows hair all over his body. Now, I'll say this, he has cured the baldness problem, because all he needs to do is shave back the rest of the hair, and he's been cured. So I think this guy's being a bit picky.
Well, that's a really good setup for Facilier, which is very much a monkey's paw voodoo man.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that sells that immediately. Oh, you want hair on your head, do you? Here you go. Oh, you've also got hair everywhere. What I love about this, though, is his payment is just like a single coin. And he takes it, shows it off to his shadow, and then pockets it, and then turns around and sees John Goodman in his ridiculous car paying for a morning paper with just a wad of cash, and is immediately annoyed, which, fair enough.
Again, I also like that this really sets the parallel between Tiana and Facilier. I think there are some problems with the relationship of the heroes and the villains in this film, but I really like the parallel of, we established that both Tiana and Facilier are poor and they are struggling to get by and to get where they want to go. Tiana combats that by working incredibly hard. Facilier combats that by trying to take a shortcut and take the easy way, and that is very reflective of those two characters. So I really like that. And again, Naveen, we get some dialogue between him and Lawrence of him saying how much he loves New Orleans. Facilier doesn't say anything in this opening at all. It's all done entirely visually, which I really like.
After our introduction of these characters then, we're back with Tiana in her workplace, where she is grafting twice as hard as anyone could ask for, at the complete sacrifice of her social life, because we meet her friends who invite her out to party later that evening, and then we never see them again. Which I'm fine with. It serves the purpose to say, look, this woman has sacrificed everything in the name of achieving her dream. The only thing that matters to her is working hard. And I think the film is selling that really well. And she has worked hard, and she's talking to the chef about how she's so close, she just needs a little bit more money and she can get the down payment for the location for her restaurant. In comes Lottie, talking about how excited she is that a real prince has come to New Orleans and she's going to woo him at her event tonight. After a bit of back and forth, Lottie hires Tiana to cater her event exclusively with beignets, giving Tiana the last money she needs for her down payment. Having finally saved up, she goes to the location with the bank, finalises the sale, and enters the dream location for her and her father's restaurant. There's a weird bit here where her mum comes to congratulate her, and as a gift she gives her her father's gumbo pot, and I just think, I imagine Tiana already had that.
Oh, thanks. Something I use every day. Great.
I understand, in the language of cinema, I understand the emotional resonance of that gesture. But this is not a family who, when the father died in war, was like, well, the gumbo pot is going in the attic.
And just to be clear, Tiana still lives with her mum. So it's not like she's moved out and got her own gumbo pot. So this leads into a nice exchange between Tiana and her mum. Her mum, by the way, is voiced by Oprah Winfrey, of all people, which blows my mind. And leads into Tiana's... I was going to say it's Tiana's I Want song, but I don't know if that's strictly true. But it's the song Almost There, and we get this gradual build into it, and we get this beautiful transition into this very stylized look of sort of simplified animation that's kind of more sort of 1920s sort of advertising, sort of Art Deco-y look almost. And Anika Noni Rose, who's the voice of Tiana, absolutely belting out this song. I'm just going to say it. I think Anika Noni Rose might have my favourite singing voice of any Disney character / performer going, and I fucking love Almost There.
I would agree. I think it's definitely one of the strongest performances in a Disney film, and wonderfully, we're back in the era where whoever you have cast to voice your character, you've also cast to sing for your character, and the transition is seamless as a result. Just a beautiful singing voice. The animation, as you say, is gorgeous. I love the style of it. And yeah, it's interesting that this takes the place of an I Want song, and it really fits that Disney revival self-awareness, having its cake and eating it too, where instead of a character sitting back and saying, this is what I want, and pouring their heart out to you, we have a character who knows that what she had to do was work hard, and she is proud of the work she has put in. But it is effectively our I Want song, and it's a really nice transition from Disney, where they're almost saying like, look, we're done with that now. This is the new Disney. We're about working hard and inspiring a new generation of women to really chase their dreams and what is important to them. It's a great song.
I sense there's a but coming.
No, there's no but per se, but there's a but. But it's just that sort of vein that runs throughout the film of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which is fine if you have bootstraps, and a lot of people in society don't.
No, it's a Disneyfied, idealised version of what poverty looks like. But again, I think it's just hugely empowering for Tiana as a character. She acknowledges the world around her, and her mother, when she sees the place she's buying, it's just a wreck. But again, we see it through Tiana's eyes, and that's so much more effective. So yeah, this transition into this gorgeous art style, not that the film doesn't look gorgeous anyway, by the way, it's a very beautiful looking film. It just absolutely sells it, and honestly, Almost There might be in my top 10, maybe even top 5 Disney songs. I don't know why, I can't fault it. There's no other song quite like it in the Disney canon.
I will say it is easily my favourite Randy Newman composed song. Absolutely. Would you believe, though, didn't even win the Oscar. It was nominated, but lost to The Weary Kind from Crazy Heart. So, Academy, what the hell, man?
So you say that's your favourite Randy Newman composed song, but we don't have to wait long for our next Randy Newman composed song, because we get our interaction between Prince Naveen and the villain of the piece, Dr. Facilier, who very quickly ingratiates himself to Naveen, who isn't exactly naive. I think he's just keen to live the high life and just go with the flow. And Facilier, we very quickly establish him as a smooth-talking, charming person who knows how to get what he wants out of people.
I have to say, I cannot believe it took Disney this long to hire Keith David as a Disney villain.
I'd be hiring him for every film. He has the best voice. He wins the voice game. If you don't recognise the name Keith David, my God, has he done a lot of stuff. He's done a lot of video game work. He's the Arbiter in Halo. He's Captain Anderson in Mass Effect.
Takes part in the greatest cinematic fight scene with Rowdy Roddy Piper in They Live. If you haven't seen that, at least, that's your number one starting point for Keith David. Doesn't show off his beautiful voice much, but shows just the raw physicality of just two men beating the shit out of each other.
As you can probably tell, I love Keith David's, just his normal voice, but I think he's also a superb voice performer, and he is leaning into Facilier having a New Orleans accent, and he's giving him a lot of mannerisms, so yeah, I think it's such a strong performance. There's clearly a lot of love for this character, and again, we've not really touched on the shadow design. He's often called the Shadow Man in this film, but his main sort of motif / gimmick is shadows, so his own shadow behaves completely differently, and we see that in the song we've got coming up in a moment, but it's such a fun idea, and it gives the animators so much to work with. Every time he's on screen, his shadow is doing something else, and it's such a nice touch to this character.
I'm going to say it. This is visually the strongest designed Disney villain since Ursula for me. I don't think anything has come close. Maybe Gaston, because Gaston nailed the brief of being, the high school jock that everyone loves. But the design is quite simple. It's a perfect design, but it's simple. Ursula is a lot of fun. Facilier is a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Bruce W. Smith, who was the lead animator on Facilier, said he was mostly inspired by Captain Hook and Cruella de Vil, who I can see a bit of, but really I see him more as an Ursula type. I think he's got that androgyny going on. Obviously, a lot of his stuff is about making deals and kind of talking people around, which Cruella and Hook just don't have at all. So, yeah. But on a side note, if I had a shadow that moved of its own accord, I'd probably mostly use it for tidying.
It's like, right, I'm going for a nap. I expect this place to be spotless by the time I wake up. And so we get into our villain song, Friends on the Other Side, which, as we always say, a good song moves the plot forward, and a lot of plot happens in this song. I will say, I don't quite understand how said plot happens during this song.
I've watched this film quite a few times, and I know this song very well. But yes, so at the start of it, Facilier's like, hey, come into my voodoo emporium and I'll make all your dreams come true. And by the end of it, they've shaken on a deal that turns Naveen into a frog and Lawrence into Naveen. And I don't know at what point they agreed to that.
I love a good monkey's paw situation. That be careful what you wish for, and if you're going to wish for it, be very, very clear in your wording, because it can be twisted. I don't know what Naveen wished for here. There's a part in the song which explains, like, you know, you want to be free, hop from place to place, and in your future, that freedom, it's going to require green. Do you want green in your future? Yes, please. But he also shows him a tarot card, which is Naveen playing his ukulele surrounded by cash. Now, that goes from twisting a wish to just straight up misleading.
But I'll say this, on the tarot cards, he is lying on a lily pad, so there is some subtlety there. But you're right, there's a difference between what do you wish for, they say it and you twist the words, versus I'm going to tell you what you want and then put a twist on it.
I wonder if that's what happened at the start with the bald man. He was just like, oh, I just wish I was more confident to talk to people. You want hair?
I guess, yeah, okay. Blows dust in his face. Now, I really want to love Friends on the Other Side. So the Friends on the Other Side that are mentioned are, I'm just going to say it, terrifying voodoo spirits who inhabit these masks, and there's some connection to, you know, the spirit world. We don't really get an explanation, but obviously it's kind of implied enough. My problem with this song is I love Facilier, I love the performance. Every time it starts getting going as a song, it kind of pulls back and then goes back into sort of narration and talking and little asides. Like, I want it to be a song that builds and builds and builds. And the finale's great, and it's weird because I was like, oh, is it because, like, Keith David isn't a very strong singer? But the singing bits, he absolutely nails. So it's like they got a bit too caught up on it being story-driven and not enough on it just being an absolute banger.
And as we've said, the story involved is still very loosely interpreted. They have a destination in mind, and they don't quite direct us there well enough.
No, and this is maybe my main criticism of this film. You're probably listening to this and thinking, God, we're only sort of 20 minutes into this film and they've been talking for 30, 40 minutes. Because I think the first act is so densely packed, it's like they're desperate to get on with it. And then what they get on with is a bit faffy and insubstantial. We've still got a little bit more of the first act to go, but then the second act is very wobbly.
And if you're very familiar with this film and saying, oh, it's not that wobbly, you've got a lot to cover, don't worry, we'll be skipping over the Three Stooges.
So we cut forward and it's the LaBeoufs, not Shear's big party, and Tiana's doing the catering and Lottie is waiting for Prince Naveen to arrive, and they're both so happy that their dreams are going to be coming true. And then the real estate agents show up and basically say, yeah, you've been outbid on the property of your dreams, so unless you get us all the money, you're going to miss out on it.
And also, before we go, we're just going to insult you based on your race.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a horrible moment, but I really like this moment because, again, I think it's the perfect level of nuance where they look at her and say, a woman of your background. Again, it's the right level for this kind of Disney film, right? In that, as a mature audience, we're acknowledging very much that they're saying, stay in your lane, you're getting ideas above your station. They're being overtly racist, but also the language is very accessible. And also, obviously, there's a degree of sexism in there as well, which I think is really well handled. Aside from them being bigots, which obviously is a big mark against them, they're also just dicks, because we establish her dad was after that property, right? For the restaurant. So that property has stood empty for like a decade. And she's gone, I will buy this property. And they've gone, okay, we found somebody else. Like, I don't think there is another buyer, basically. I think they're just trying to drive up the price. It's a classic estate agent technique. Pretend there's another buyer. They don't exist.
Yeah, I think they're perfectly used. In a different draft, they could have easily been the villains of the film, but they come into the story, they serve their purpose, and for the most part, they then leave. And yeah, they perfectly encapsulate that dismissive, racist attitude. Like, in one way, they might not be saying, stay in your lane. They might genuinely just not believe a woman of her background could ever possibly run a business. That couldn't happen. That's not what they do. It's better for her if she just sticks to what she's doing. Like, perfectly done. And they're out of the story. And of course, now then, we have Tiana, who has had her dreams completely smashed. We get a brief reprise of Almost There, with the slight change from I'm almost there to I was almost there, and it is heartbreaking.
During this sequence and some of the chaos that ensues, Tiana has to change clothes, so she swaps into one of Lottie's gorgeous ball gowns. I don't know how she fits into it, because they seem to have very different figures, but fine. And eventually Prince Naveen shows up, and Lottie descends the stairs in very much her power pose, and we get a nice kind of classic Disney callback of they go immediately into the sort of the ballroom slow foxtrot step that it's very much the trope of the dance we get in at the end of Sleeping Beauty and Beauty and the Beast. So just a nice little callback, and obviously it's playing on those princess and prince tropes.
Meanwhile, still dejected at the news, Tiana is preparing herself to rejoin the party and sees the evening star and thinks, I've tried everything else. I may as well resort to something as silly and childish as this. I'll wish on the star. She wishes on the star and sees that her wishes have apparently sarcastically been answered by the presence of a frog. And she says, oh, I see. I guess you want me to kiss you too. Again, winking with its tongue very much in its cheek at the audience. But at this point, the frog responds and says, well, I wouldn't mind.
So we establish that Naveen has been transformed into a frog, and the solution they both think is for her to kiss him. And when she does, instead Tiana is turned into a frog.
This is a weird one, because again, this comes down to the hard work element. Because what essentially happens here is, after having her dreams crushed, she's put the hard work in, Tiana sees a shortcut. Hey, if you kiss me and turn me back into a human, I'll buy you your restaurant. It's a shortcut. It's got nothing to do with the work she's put in, but she's willing to take it now because she is desperate. And in that desperation, she gets punished.
Yeah, it doesn't really work as a narrative beat. And also, it's not that she's still done all the hard work, right? Like, by all rights, she should be at the point where she's got the restaurant.
It's a very messy road to the message, but I quite like this twist on the Princess and the Frog. It's once again a bit unfortunate, to say the least, that our first princess of colour spends most of the running time of this film as a frog, because yes, as she kisses Naveen, because she was not a princess, she gets turned into a frog, because Facilier has a very, very specific curse he's placed on Naveen here.
I mean, that could spread wildly out of control. That's basically an infection. Like, what if, hundreds of people ended up with this, and then there's just, one princess who just has to, turn loads and loads of people back? And speaking of messy plot devices, so a bunch of shenanigans ensue, and for convoluted reasons, Naveen and Tiana not only turned into frogs, but also end up in the middle of the Louisiana bayou, and we quickly learn that the Naveen that is at the party is actually Lawrence in disguise, and he's in cahoots with Facilier. I say in cahoots, Facilier is basically bullying him into being his henchman. And this is where I feel the film gets very wobbly. We'll talk about these in a bit more detail, but basically what follows is the following formula. Naveen and Tiana meet a crazy character in the swamp. They learn a little bit about themselves and about each other, and they get a bit closer. We cut back, and Facilier is angry with Lawrence. And then we cut back, and they meet another crazy character. That happens 4 times in a row.
What can we say, Ben? Facilier is just a very angry man.
I've got a note here that just says, the way he says Larry is so good. Even though the character's called Lawrence, he just starts calling him Larry. Larry.
I do quite like that dynamic between the two of them. It's at this point as well that we see Facilier's goal, which is the first time where a villain's goal has simply been greed, works and makes sense. Facilier says to Lawrence, we both know the real power is money. We're going to marry you off to the heiress of this fortune, kill the big man, and then we're going to split the money and we will own this town. Because I am sick of the people with money being able to do whatever they want and the rest of us being left in the lurch to feed off their scraps. And I'm like, you know what? I finally buy a villain who is motivated by greed because he has lived in a world where, despite his mystical powers, because of his race, he is powerless in society. And the only way he can exert any kind of control or power on a wider scale is by being rich. He's never going to be a wealthy white leader, but he can still own the town. And I'm like, I quite like this. It blows Ratcliffe and Brian Blessed, Clayton, there we go, completely out of the water.
It's great. I really love it. As we've already touched on, it's somewhat problematic that narratively the onus is kind of put on the black characters to find a way out of poverty, and the onus is on them to change, not the white characters to, stop being dicks. But I guess that's okay. Particularly
given that the most wealthy white character seemingly isn't a dick, and is seemingly very nice, generous, and, a gracious overlord for the peons. He could have given Tiana the money for her restaurant at any point, and I understand she wouldn't have taken it. She would have wanted to work for it and not had the shortcut.
I think that needs to be in the film, though, because when you're watching it, you go, Charlotte's Tiana's best friend, and at no point in their 19 years together has she ever gone, by the way, I can just solve your one problem in life like that. I think having a moment where Tiana refuses that would be significant.
Yeah, because... And again, I understand the motivation about not wanting to just be handed the solution. But Tiana is smart. She could work something out. She could say, I don't want a handout. I want a business partner. This is an investment. And they never address it. This is awful, but it reminds me of Benedict Cumberbatch in 12 Years a Slave, who is shown to be a very kind plantation owner. But when it really comes to it, he is no different from the other plantation owners. He is still a slave owner. And the film makes that point. At no point are John Goodman or Lottie ever shown to be flawed white characters. So I don't ever really understand how they aren't helping Tiana.
And again, this film's set in Louisiana. It's said that Big Daddy, which is John Goodman's character name, he's a sugar baron, right? That's pretty explicit in terms of where that money's come from, right? I like that it's in the film. I feel like they should have just had a little bit more acknowledgement in those areas. I also love, as you say, the moment where Facilier says, magic's not the real power in this world, money is. And I was like, well, money can't turn people into frogs. So let's agree they're both powers, okay?
Nor can money get someone to clean your room while you're asleep. Oh, wait, no, it can actually.
We also get, and again, this is another problem with Friends on the Other Side, where during the sequence you're like, wow, Facilier is really powerful. He's got all these tricks and things he can do, and he's got these incredible powerful spirits on his side. But basically in the next scene we see that he's terrified of these spirits and he's massively in debt to them in some abstract way. And that anytime he asks a favour of them, it's a huge deal and he's really pushing his luck. Again, it just feels like there's a bit missing where we go, well, hang on, which of these is true? And again, you can say that Friends on the Other Side, Facilier is presenting this front where he's really in control when actually he's not, but it just feels a bit weird.
I actually really like it. I like that we are introduced to this powerful character, and then when he's on his own, he shows that it is mostly a front. We get a nice moment where Lawrence tells him, well, why do you need me? They have this little charm necklace where when Lawrence is wearing it, he looks like Naveen. And Lawrence is like, well, you do it. So Facilier puts it on. He says, that's the interesting thing about voodoo. Can't conjure a single thing for myself. Which, yes, is a little bit of storytelling. Like, okay, we need him not to be able to do this on his own. But also in doing so, it's a nice bit of character building of like, he has these powers, but they're useless to him, very much like the genie in a way.
Of course, Facilier has the additional power to be able to resist making pop culture references that will date very badly.
Yeah, that is the one thing missing from this film, I think. Meanwhile, back in the bayou, Tiana and Naveen are getting to know each other, as well as various other characters. First off, we meet Lewis, which always throws me. I keep expecting to say Louis, but it's not. It is specifically Lewis.
It's Lewis, but he spells it Louis, and he wants to be like Louis Armstrong.
Yeah, he specifically says that in one of the songs of the film, which I think is basically just Human Again from Beauty and the Beast, but a little bit better. I said a little bit. Look, it was good enough not to get cut from this version.
I mentioned there's a lot of explicit Disney references to other films throughout this film, so some of them are quite heavy-handed. So you see carpet getting dusted off out of a window early on. Later on, during Mardi Gras, there's a Triton float and a float that is clearly very inspired by Aladdin. There's a moment later on where people are looking into a magic cauldron and the imagery is very much evocative of The Little Mermaid. There's a moment during this song where Lewis kind of bunches up some vines around his head, and the movement of it is just like Madam Mim, like pulling her hair apart and having the pig face. And I assume it's a genuine intentional reference, but I was like, man, that's a deep cut.
It's a weird one, isn't it? Because all of the other references tend to be the other Musker and Clements films.
But it's too similar for it to be a coincidence. I'm certain of that.
No, absolutely. I quite like the character of Lewis. I think he's a lot of fun. There's some really good jokes with him, where without him having to be overtly a comic relief side character.
I think he adds nothing to this film. I think he gets the best joke in the whole film, which is where he says he wants to go and join the jazz band, and they say, why don't you? And he says, I tried it once. We cut away in Family Guy style. He jumps on board, blows the trumpet solo, has a really excited face, and we cut to just him jumping off and them shooting 1,000,000 bullets into the swamp after him. That's the best joke in the film.
And a great setup to a later joke as well.
Yes.
The second character then that they meet is Winnie the Pooh, reincarnated as a Firefly.
Yeah, we've got Jim Cummings doing his best yokel drawl.
I think it's a pretty good Cajun character. I think it suits the animation. It's very over the top and I feel maybe is a bit out of place in this film. But I can totally see what the brief from the directors was. Like, that is a Cajun drawl. Nailed.
So both Ray and Lottie in this film are characters who, every time I watch this film when they first appear, I'm like, oh, this character's quite annoying. And by the end of the film, I find them both quite lovable. Particularly Ray. So I say Lewis does nothing in this film, and he basically doesn't do anything in this film. He's just there to kind of faff about. But Ray genuinely solves almost all the plot issues in this film. Every time there's a sort of a scrape that the characters get into, Ray's the one who fixes it. They would all be dead if it wasn't for Ray.
I'll agree with that. I quite like Louis, but the film would still work if you removed every scene with Louis. I don't see why Tiana and Naveen couldn't have stumbled upon a Ray when they first got to the bayou. Well, no, it's because they couldn't have a Louis Armstrong style number about being human again.
You say that, so they meet Lewis, they sing a song about being human again, and it's like, right, we're gonna go and find Mama Odie and she'll sort all this out. Cut back to Facilier, cut back, they meet Ray. He says, you're going the wrong way, this is how you get to Mama Odie. And then they sing another song about going to see Mama Odie. It is ridiculous that they do it twice in a row.
And then we cut back to Facilier, who says, go Shadows, let's sing a song about going to find Mama Odie.
I'd like it if Facilier got another song. Instead he just goes, alright Shadows, go mess shit up. Maybe not a direct quote. Then we get the Three Stooges, which again adds almost nothing to the plot. Again, like, we get incremental character development between Tiana and Naveen. So basically, they're kind of moving closer together, but also Naveen's learning that he's kind of lived a charmed life, but also he's not really capable of doing anything, and he's kind of learning to be self-sufficient, and that actually you can't just sit and wait for other people to sort out all your problems. Whereas Tiana's learning that you can't do everything yourself, and sometimes you need other people close to you. Which, again, it's a bit jarring, because Tiana's not really... It's not that she's, like, pushes people away. She's obviously very close to her mum and was very close to her dad, but, you know...
Is that what she's learning, though?
Well, I think that's what she's meant to be learning. I don't know if that is what we get. Honestly, Liam, I feel the takeaway I always get for Tiana's character arc is she's perfect, but she just needs to realise she needs penis in her life.
A bit like Belle, really, then.
Yeah, well, why does this character need to change? So, I'm jumping ahead a bit, but the finale of this film is basically Facilier offering Tiana the quick and easy way out that she could take. And she says, my daddy never got the dream he wanted, but he had love and that was more important. And she turns down Facilier's offer. But I feel like at every point in this film, Tiana would have turned down that offer because she's never been about taking the easy way out. And the only lesson seems to be is she needs a man in her life. And don't get me wrong, it's clear that Tiana's happier once she's got Naveen. But it's just, I don't know, I feel it undermines her a bit as a character.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying with the kiss with Naveen, where I just feel it's a bit mean-spirited. Our character is at her lowest point, and it's framed, possibly accidentally, as her being offered the easy way to her dream, and by taking that, she is punished. Whereas, I can't blame her, she's at her absolute lowest point. She's just had her dreams dashed, and this is a final glimmer of hope. And it's the same thing, I suppose, with Facilier at the end, except instead of kissing the frog, she refuses the offer. And again, actually, similar to Beauty and the Beast, I think the stronger character arc is our male protagonist. There is a moment where Naveen says, when my parents cut me off, I realised I didn't know how to do anything. And it's very much that ethos of hard work versus wealth. You can be given wealth, but it won't mean anything. The more important thing is the work ethic, which, again, I think is a little bit of a mean-spirited message for a film set in the backdrop of African Americans in the 1920s.
And as we've said, Lottie doesn't do any work, and she's got it all. Just on a side note, who's paying Lawrence? Because Naveen doesn't have any money. So I can only assume Lawrence is doing it for the joy of being horribly mistreated.
I assume he's being paid by the king and queen, because the king and queen are still wealthy. They've just cut off Naveen. And when he returns home, I'm now trying to picture the situation if everything had gone according to Lawrence and Facilier's plan. Lawrence, in the form of Naveen, goes home, greets the king and queen with a completely different accent, and they're like, what happened to the very expensive English butler we sent with you? And then in the voice of the butler says, oh, he died, I guess.
He just loved New Orleans so much. Also, please ignore this 7-foot-tall man in a top hat whose shadow is eyeing your hearts horribly. So, of course, Facilier isn't the only voodoo character we get in this. We're introduced to Mama Odie, who's also voodoo, but she does good voodoo? Goodoo? And she has this feels racist just saying this, but she has a magic gumbo pot. And I say pot, it's basically a bathtub full of gumbo, which aside from the magic properties, that's too much gumbo for one 179-year-old woman to get through.
I enjoy Mama Odie. I think she's the right level of comicness. She's basically a very silly version of Rafiki in terms of her role within the plot. It's that guidance character, but they're having a lot of fun with it as well.
I think Rafiki's a good reference point, but the problem is Rafiki's introduced fairly early on, and he does have a sort of fill-in paternal role, and obviously the connection for Simba to go back is around heritage and fatherhood and things like that. Tiana's already trying to get home. So basically what happens is they set off to meet Mama Odie, then they turn around and go the right way to meet Mama Odie. Then they encounter the Three Stooges. They meet Mama Odie and she says, yep, go back. I can't fix your problem, you gotta fix it yourself. And it's just like, right, so this was functionally a waste of time.
See, what you've described there is the plot of Mad Max Fury Road, and it works excellently there. Why doesn't it work here then?
No car chases.
Ah, that would be why.
Mad Max Fury Road is 90 minutes of car chases.
Mama Odie also sings a song here, which I always get confused with the song from The Lion King 1.5 called Dig a Tunnel. And they're very different.
I haven't seen Lion King 1.5. They've really gone down in stakes from I'm going to kill the king and then commit an act of both regicide and fratricide to let's dig a tunnel.
Well, that's the thing. That song is literally just about digging a tunnel, whereas this one, Dig a Little Deeper, is... It's a really interesting song because it's the first time Disney acknowledge the format of... So the crux of any Disney Renaissance film is your character will express their want, and over the course of the film, in chasing that want, they will actually realise what they need. And this film just straight up says that. Mama Odie's like, look, you both know what you want, but you need to figure out what you need. For Naveen, you want money and a freewheeling lifestyle. What you actually need is a fresh start. And then she turns to Tiana and says, what you want is to achieve your dream. What you need is, I don't know, you're already pretty perfect. Just dig a little deeper, I'm sure it will come to you.
Yeah, it's not quite at the same level as remember who you are my son and the one true king. It's like, just have a look. And
as you say, they've gone to Mama Odie for guidance. They say, where do we go next? And she says, back home, because Naveen needs to kiss a princess. And hey, look, if Big Daddy, John Goodman, is king of Mardi Gras, then Lottie is a princess for the day. In fact, sorry, can we just talk about this for a second? I only this year learned that Mardi Gras is just Shrove Tuesday. And like where Mardi Gras is celebrated, so like New Orleans and in a lot of places in South America, they have these big festivals that are like raucous celebrations. What do we do on Shrove Tuesday? We just eat pancakes. Americans
eat pancakes every day. It's a big thing. In Britain, it's once a year, and then you don't have anything nice for 40 days. It's genuinely the celebration. My note is that she says, you've got to get back before midnight, because that's when Mardi Gras ends, and Lottie will stop being a princess. And I was like, I've never been to Mardi Gras. I don't think it ends at midnight. I think it goes on quite a lot later than that.
Well, weirdly enough, this is the one time I like the ending at midnight clause. Obviously, it's a send-up and a reference to the Cinderella, the magic will be broken at midnight, the witching hour. Whereas here, Mardi Gras, literally Tuesday, like big or I can't remember what, is Gras big or is it, I think it's Big Tuesday or Happy Tuesday.
Big Tuesday. Yeah. It is Mardi, yeah.
Big Tuesday, it ends at midnight. So it actually makes sense for once in a fairy tale.
Before they head back, Naveen decides to basically have a date with Tiana, and he's actually going to propose to her, which is quite weird. But it's a nice moment. And what we get during this sequence is Naveen realises that what Tiana needs for her dream is basically she needs money. She needs the capital so she can have her dream. And the steamer boat they're on literally goes past where she wants to open her restaurant. And Naveen has a moment where he realises what he now both wants and needs is to be with Tiana. But he thinks that what she needs is this restaurant because that's her dream. So he decides to do the selfless thing. And he goes, well, I'll go and marry Lottie then, because then I can get the money that Tiana needs to follow her dream, which again is a really nice moment. And again, it's an issue of Naveen kind of having a proper character arc and Tiana not.
We haven't quite entered the period of Disney mocking whirlwind romances that we would get in, say, Frozen. And part of me is like, this is a very sudden proposal, and he's fallen for her very quickly. But I think it works, and I really like what it is setting up, where he's like, I love this woman, Frog, and part of that love is going to be putting her needs above my own. I really like that, and I do wish Disney would get off its self-congratulatory horse of saying, it's weird that you only met today and you're proposing to each other, but hey-ho.
I think it's also a good twist on things like Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid. We talked in our Little Mermaid podcast about the sort of being born sexy yesterday, which Ariel has, where she rocks up and basically she can't talk, but Eric still falls for her, partly because she's kooky, but mostly because he finds her hot. And again, there's sort of similar issues with Beauty and the Beast, where obviously there's a weird power dynamic there and, it's not quite equal. Whereas here, these characters aren't attracted to each other physically because they are frogs. It's entirely...
You say that. She is a very attractive frog.
Yeah, there's some weird moments where they go, she's a frog, but if you were a frog, you would.
Also, I looked it up. Mardi Gras is literally just Fat Tuesday. What a great name.
Fat Tuesday. I'm definitely calling it that from now on. Just takes the magic right out of it.
So yeah, Naveen has decided that he's going to put Tiana's want above his need. And it's beautiful. But before he could do so, the terrifying shadows capture him. In fact, I know I said we wouldn't talk about the Three Stooges. The Three Stooges scene happens immediately after Facilier sends the shadows after Tiana, after Naveen. He doesn't know about Tiana yet. And I'm just thinking, why isn't this a scene with the shadows? Because eventually the shadows do catch up to them and are just immediately destroyed by Mamarodi.
Because then there'd be any connection between what Facilier was doing and what was happening with Tiana and Naveen, and we cannot have that. There must be two separate plot threads that barely connect.
But they do something here. The shadows kidnap Naveen, Frognap, and take him back to Facilier and Lawrence so that they can extract his blood and repower the amulet.
And Tiana runs through to Mardi Gras and then is heartbroken because she sees Naveen has not only turned back human, but is now marrying Lottie. And not only has she lost her old dream of having a restaurant, but she's lost her new need of being with Naveen. Now, I think this would work a lot better if Tiana didn't know for a fact there is someone impersonating Naveen who looks just like him who is trying to marry Lottie. Which she conveniently forgets.
Is she aware of that at this point?
She's seen the fake Naveen show up, dance with Lottie, and then Naveen tells her that there is a fake imposter out there.
No, you're absolutely right. And also, one thing I like about this is we have Ray filling his importance in the plot again, who, after he sees Tiana, he's really excited, being like, oh, where's the ring? Not realising that Naveen hadn't proposed, and he lets slip. And she realises both how Naveen feels and what he was going to do for her. And then she stumbles upon the classic Prince Eric and Vanessa moment from The Little Mermaid. It's the same thing again. It's a nice reference to their earlier work, and she's heartbroken, which leads to a very upsetting scene where she is sulking in a cemetery, which, I mean, I guess. And Ray comes along to comfort her and basically just breaks Ray's heart by telling him to wake up and realise that the Firefly he is in love with, Evangeline, is just a star, and he needs to get over that and realise what's going on. I will say, we've not really talked much about Evangeline. I kind of love that there is a character who is literally in love with the star that people wish on.
It's very sweet and it's very well done. And yeah, again, it's a nice play on what this star means to different people, and that, you know, a lot of it's about perception and things like that. Yeah, I really like it.
Meanwhile, back at the float, we have a really quite nicely done sequence where Lawrence and Lottie are getting married. Naveen is imprisoned in a small chest where he can't cause any trouble. And this is all cut with Facilier holding a voodoo doll of Big Daddy and slowly bringing a needle to its heart, basically implying that as soon as Lawrence and Lottie are married, he's just going to kill Big Daddy. No hesitation at all. Like, right, the wedding has happened. It's now our money.
To be fair, if you had to rely on Lawrence, you'd want to do so for the smallest amount of time possible. You'd be like, right, you've done it, dead. I presume he then also has one that's Lottie, kill her, and then he'll have one for like a day's time where he kills Lawrence as well.
He doesn't need the Lottie one. It's 1920s. As soon as her dad is dead, her husband inherits all the money.
The system works.
That's what this film is. It's Musker and Clements saying there is nothing wrong with the system as is. We, two middle-aged white men, have said so.
By the way, on just the subject of Musker and Clements in this sequence, there are animated versions of them on one of the floats throwing out flower braids, which is nice.
But luckily, to save the day, not deterred by his recent heartbreak, Ray comes along. He's like, what are you doing, Naveen? You're supposed to be marrying Tiana. And then he realises that Naveen is in the little chest, is still a frog. Between the two of them, they manage to disrupt the wedding. Naveen escapes and runs into a nearby church and basically confronts Lawrence and is like, why are you doing this? Completely not realising that his previous philandering, free-spirited days have been a complete burden to his manservant. A tussle ensues, and the amulet is stolen by Ray, who escapes trying to take it to Tiana to show her that, like, look, what you saw is not real. Here is the proof you needed to reinforce what you should have already believed based on your knowledge of the situation, but here you go. If you need the proof, here it is.
This isn't entirely related to this part of the plot, but I needed to talk about it somewhere. What are the rules in terms of animals talking to things? Because we establish multiple times that the frogs can talk to people, and we also establish that once you're turned into a frog, you can talk to other animals. So do frogs have an intrinsic ability to speak between species? Or is it when you've been magically transformed and then that's just a permanent gift you get? Because after the characters are human, they still retain the ability to talk to animals. It doesn't make any sense.
It makes as much sense as Pocahontas and John Smith being able to talk to each other, so I'll allow it.
Magic, basically. It's magic. Move on, Ben. So Ray takes the amulet to Tiana and tells her to run. Ray, using his glowing butt, fights off the remaining shadows of Facilier. And then Facilier's response is to swat Ray to one side, stamp on him and kill him. Which, I always forget that Facilier does actually kill a quite lovable Disney character, which again is a rarity for a Disney villain. We think that they always get a kill in, but it's actually surprisingly rare, so well done, Facilier.
I mean, from an audience perspective, it's pretty shocking, but look at it from Facilier's perspective. There's a small insect being a bit of a bother to him and he just stands on it.
Yeah, Facilier, as far as I can tell, doesn't know that Ray is anything special, and his reaction, to be fair, is just going to straighten my jacket and move on.
And so it's at this point that our protagonist finally meets our villain.
It's weird, because in this sequence, Facilier seems to know kind of Tiana's past and what she wants, and it's not clear whether that's kind of his powers or whatever, or whether he genuinely knows her. Earlier on in the film, Tiana says, "Oh, you made a deal with the Shadow Man," kind of implying she knows Facilier and that he's a bit of a trickster. But yeah, it's particularly weird that there's no direct interaction between these characters. It kind of has the Hercules-Hades thing of, even though they're sort of working against each other, they don't actually know each other.
It's disappointing, and I think there are ways you can do it. So if I think of Aladdin, I think we mentioned this with Hercules as well, but if you think of Aladdin, Aladdin doesn't really know who Jafar is. He doesn't know that Jafar is the bad guy when he meets him at the start, because they meet in disguise. And then in the second half of the film, Jafar doesn't know it's Aladdin, but they're still constantly interacting. And then you can have the reveals at the end where they both have all of the information. They need to be having some interaction, you're right. I think part of this interaction is that Facilier offers her the shortcut. You can finally achieve your dream, you just have to give me that amulet. And this would have worked if he had offered her it before. Or, as we said in Hercules, if Hades was the source of Hercules' power and then took it away. You took the shortcut, now you have to do it on your own. The problem here is Tiana never needed the shortcut. And then, as you say, when she's offered it, it doesn't feel like she ever would have said yes to that. There's been interactions with Naveen and Facilier, and I think we've kind of overlooked that because he is very much the second protagonist of this film, so it's okay to have that interaction. But if that's the case, the final confrontation also has to be Naveen and Facilier, or the two of them together.
Yeah, absolutely. I could see a version of this where Naveen is offered, you can go about having your freewheeling lifestyle and you can have your money. I don't need Lawrence if I've got you in on my scheme. You know, I'll have all the souls of New Orleans to feed to my terrifying spirit overlords and you can go back to your old life. But Naveen has grown and he says, I don't want the easy thing anymore. I want the hard thing and I want it with Tiana. But yeah, that's not what we get. It's like they knew Tiana was the protagonist, but they didn't know how to have her character arc link back to what Facilier does.
But as the protagonist and as the strong-spirited, good person that she is, she knows, look, I'm not going to take the shortcut. My dad never achieved his dream, but he had what mattered most, the people who loved him. And she knows that she can break the amulet and that will do something. I don't know how she knows that. Maybe it's, to be fair, that might be ignorance on my part. This might be quite an important part of voodoo culture, where people who have knowledge of that voodoo would know what this totem is.
I took it that it was more that Facilier's like, careful what you do with that, give it to me. So she's just like, well, he's bad and he doesn't want anything bad happening to this. So I just took it as like, she just kind of read the situation. Every time someone's touched, she's like, careful with that, you know, don't damage it. So,
but no, she refuses the offer, breaks the amulet, and what happens?
What happens is Facilier's so-called friends on the other side realise that Facilier is never going to pay off his debt, so they claim the one thing they can, which is Facilier himself. We get a truly horrifying reprise of Friends on the Other Side, sung by the spirits, who are literally coming out of graves, and Facilier is trying to reason with them, trying to talk his way out of it, tries to run away, but the shadows grab his shadow, and I don't really know any other way to describe it other than a man is dragged, screaming and begging, into hell.
No, that seems pretty appropriate. I really like his tombstone, which is just the word Facilier and then his horrifying scream immortalised in rock.
Now, a friend of ours pointed out that even though Facilier is, defeated, killed, dragged into hell, the dark side of this film at the end is there still is an army of spirits desperate to eat the souls of everyone in New Orleans. They're not defeated, they're still there, and oh boy, they can wait.
No, everything's fine. The villain's gone.
I'm sure there'll be no more desperate young black men in New Orleans who will be tempted by the spirits who will offer them magic in exchange for souls. I'm sure no one will be tempted by that.
Because society is fine and all you have to do is work hard and pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Or be born white and rich. Those are the two routes. It's that's equality for you.
Which leads us quite nicely to our finale, and I quite like this. Basically, Naveen has caught up with Lottie and explained the situation. Lawrence, for some reason, has been arrested.
I don't get what they're arresting him for. I can only assume they're going for the ancient law of being a party pooper at Mardi Gras, and Lawrence is the least fun person, so they go, we're going to arrest him.
That or the police listened to the talking frog. What, you're saying this man impersonated you for the last week?
But even if that was true, I don't think Lawrence has actually committed any crimes. I mean, there's conspiracy to commit murder, I suppose. That's probably a crime.
And yeah, we have this really nice moment between Naveen and Lottie, where he says, if you kiss me, I'll turn back into a prince. I will marry you. You will be my princess. But this is all on the condition that you help Tiana get her restaurant because she is my Evangeline. And Lottie is like, yep, sure, I would have helped her with her restaurant ages ago, but I just never thought to.
Lottie's pretty chill about the talking frogs, right? They start talking and she doesn't go, what? She's just like, oh, okay, cool.
Well, I think she has the same reaction Tiana has when Naveen first introduces himself, which is to hit him with a book, because it is shocking to see a talking frog. But, she's spent her life growing up on fairy tales and princess stories. She's on board with it very, very quickly.
And the talking alligator as well.
Oh, we skipped over the other joke I really like. It's just the same joke that was set up earlier, where Lewis sneaks onto the boat and hides because he's terrified that people are going to be chasing him with guns again. And instead, he realises that it's a costume party, and they're all like, oh, that's a really good alligator costume. Come play with us. Which is then just another setup to later on when he needs to get through the crowd. He reveals that he is a real alligator, sending everyone screaming.
So Lottie, to break the spell, she decides to kiss Naveen, not for herself, but for Naveen and Tiana, just as the clock strikes. She's missed the deadline, so she's no longer a princess. So I guess Tiana and Naveen are just frogs now. So we cut forward and they're getting married in the swamp by Mama Odie. Bambi's there and all the animals are gathering around. They get married, and as they kiss and their marriage becomes official, because Naveen is a prince, Tiana then becomes a princess, which means Naveen is kissing a princess, which breaks the spell for both of them, turning them both back into humans, which is a nice little narrative little twist.
I really love that little twist at the end. I will say, I find it odd that, as well as accepting their fate of being talking frogs, they choose to live in the swamp.
Yeah, because Lottie knows that they're frogs, right? And she's just like, well, I'm off back to my mansion now. Don't know where you guys are going.
It's her recurring character trait, is just turning a blind eye to the suffering of others.
But also this narrative twist of she's now become a princess, this is all worked back into Facilier's original curse. There's so much admin in this one curse.
I can't talk about this kiss and this wedding sequence without also mentioning that this might be, in my opinion, the most beautiful 2D animation that Disney have ever done. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. It might not be my favourite animated sequence, but it is, to me, the most gorgeous.
Yeah, we've not touched hugely on this, but in spirit, this film may well be harking back to the Disney Renaissance, but my God, animation has come a long way in those 10 years. Even traditional 2D animation. This film looks pretty gorgeous all the way through, and it's leaps and bounds ahead of the films from the 90s in terms of, maybe not in terms of some of the visual design choices. It certainly doesn't have the scale of, say, The Hunchback of Notre Dame or The Lion King, but the smoothness and the use of colour, and particularly shadow and light, is gorgeous. And yeah, I'd second that. This transformation sequence is beautiful.
And so with both Tiana and Naveen returned to their human forms, Tiana has learnt that it's okay to use shortcuts to get what you want, and uses Lewis to intimidate the bankers into accepting her original offer. And now she can open her restaurant finally. Except,
of course, her and Naveen are running it together. We get a really nice closing song. Again, Anika Noni Rose, I just think she's got an absolutely incredible voice. We see Lewis is leading the jazz band. We see Tiana's mother's there. Naveen is still cutting a rug, but also learning to work hard. The two of them wander out onto the rooftop, and we end with the two of them dancing and the line, "Dreams come true in New Orleans," and this gorgeous pan back as we see this sprawling 1920s version of the city. And the film ends. Cutting to a wonderful song over the end credits by Neo. I don't know who that is, so I'm just going to picture Neo from The Matrix. And that is The Princess and the Frog. But before Liam and I pass our final judgment on it, Liam, is there anything else we need to talk about regarding this film? There is just one thing, and this is a very special occasion because it's going to be, as of the time of recording, the last time we add a 2D traditionally animated character to the list of sexiest characters. Because, Ben, we need to decide who is the sexiest character in The Princess and the Frog. As always, we're referring to characters that we believe are unnecessarily sexualized or inappropriately so for a family entertainment film. And I've got to say, whilst nothing's particularly overt, we have some good choices in this film. So Ben, who is the sexiest character in The Princess and the Frog? I think in a lesser film, there are some sexy moths that Naveen sings with during the swamp sequence. But realistically, I think this is one of those that I'd put in the sort of Hercules, Aladdin ballpark of, I think the strong case is both the male lead and the female lead. But if I was going to be pushed, I think I'd probably lean towards Naveen. How about yourself? I would agree. I think it's unfortunate that both of these characters spend over half of the runtime as frogs, albeit sexy frogs, as I've mentioned. I think they're both attractive characters. There's not too much sexualization to them, with the exception of maybe Naveen, who is shown as a bit of a womanizer and philanderer, and that kind of goes with that. I will also say there's an honourable mention to Lottie, who, whilst not necessarily sexy, is somewhat jiggly for an animated film. Yeah, there's a particular moment where she's kind of going back into battle, as it were, and she really adjusts her bust in a very humorous way. I love the whole performance on Lottie, by the way. As I say, it starts out a bit annoying, but it's just wonderfully over the top and ridiculous. There's one moment with Lottie which I forgot to mention, and it's a nice throwaway joke, but at the end of the film, she's dancing with Naveen's younger brother, and she says, "Who'd have guessed the prince had a younger brother who's also a prince? How old did you say you were again?" And he's like 7.5 or something. And she says, "Well, I've waited this long. Ha ha ha." And I'm like, that's grooming. That's really creepy. Yeah, they don't really give Lottie a character arc in this film, whereas really she could do with one. And with that, there is just one thing left for us to do, and that is to decide whether or not we believe The Princess and the Frog does enough to earn a spot on the prestigious list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. As protocol dictates, first we must retrieve the list. And as we cross the bayou, led by swarms of fireflies, we reach the vault. We open the door, step inside, reach into the pot of magical gumbo, and pull out the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. Quill in hand, Ben, does The Princess and the Frog make it onto the list? This for me is one of the harder ones to make a decision on. It's definitely not an auto-include, but it's also not an auto-exclude either. this for me is one that really kind of goes down to the wire. I think this film looks and sounds fantastic. I don't think all the songs are absolute grade A bangers, but Down in New Orleans I think is great. Friends on the Other Side doesn't quite get going, but I really like some of the stuff in it. And as I say, Almost There is one of my all-time Disney favourites. It has all the right feel of a Disney film. I think where it falls down is in terms of its pacing and its plot, and we've talked about that quite a lot during this podcast, but when I was first watching it, I was like, man, this film's obviously got a lot to give. It's so quick to get on with it, because that first 20 minutes, it's really roller coaster paced in terms of we need to get to setting up all this stuff, and then it doesn't really feel like it goes anywhere. We've talked about Tiana kind of lacking a proper character arc, there not being a good enough relationship between Tiana and Facilier. I don't think it quite makes it there. This film is a huge amount of fun. You know, I put it in some ways in the Hercules, Emperor's New Groove area, where it's a good film, it's a huge amount of fun, but I don't think it's a great film. So for me, it's a very reluctant no. How about yourself?
Potentially controversial, but I am not as reluctant to say no about this film. I think Hercules is a really good comparison point where I can take so many elements of this film that I love, but the underlying structure of the film itself is pretty weak. And really the biggest weakness of this film to me is that it's an adaptation of The Princess and the Frog, and a lot of the ideas that came about after that initial pitch are far better than that restriction. It's a stupid analogy, but what I was thinking about watching this is that someone set up a really good foundation for a 2-bedroom house, and then the architect came along and brought the design of an avant-garde mini mansion, and they were like, well, we like the design, it doesn't quite fit the foundation, but we'll see what we can work. Let's just chop these bedrooms, put them on top. We quite like the swimming pool, we don't want to lose it. Let's just flood the upstairs ensuite, because that's basically the same as a swimming pool, and it's just not. They've tried to make really good ideas fit this structure that can't support it. And as a result, there's a lot of cut corners and things that are just swept aside and assumed so the plot can move forward. But more so than that, the main reason I'm not reluctant to say no is because at its core, I just do not like the politics of this film. You shared my thoughts earlier. I love the premise of Disney doing a film saying you can't just sit back and wish, you have to put hard work into it. But my word, do not tell that story against the backdrop of Black Americans in the South of America in the 1920s. What the hell are you doing? That's so patronising and missing the point. Like, again, this isn't Musker and Clement's story to tell. Even the New Orleans stuff, it feels very much like they are tourists of New Orleans as opposed to the storytellers of it, and everything is just paying lip service. I think whilst everything is good, they are excellent directors in the same way that Randy Newman is an excellent songwriter. But this is what happens when you don't get the right people to tell the right story. When you're telling someone else's story and writing someone else's music, it will feel inauthentic and a copy of it. And I feel that a lot of the problems with this film can be traced back to those decisions. So for me, I think this massively misses the mark, and I have no problem saying I don't want to put it on the list.
So The Princess and the Frog does not make the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. We put it back in the vault and close it for another week. But of course, these are just the opinions of Liam and myself. Do you agree with myself that whilst good and there's some good things in there, The Princess and the Frog doesn't quite make it? Or do you lean towards Liam's view that there's actually quite a lot of flaws and fundamentally this film is broken? Or indeed, do you feel that we are being unfair to The Princess and the Frog and it is worthy of being listed as a true classic? As always, we are very keen to hear your opinions. Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics is available on SoundCloud, Spotify, various hosting platforms, and a special enhanced version on YouTube where we also put up edits, analysis, interviews, and a whole bunch of other content. And speaking of other content, there are always more animated films to watch. So Liam, which film are we putting up for consideration for Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics next time?
Ben, we've finally done it. We have reached the 50th animated classic from Walt Disney. Next time we are looking at Tangled, a return back to the 3D animation, and a film whose existence brought both of us back to Disney, I would say. So I am very excited to revisit this one. And with that, all that's left to say is thank you very much for listening. We really do appreciate it. And remember to give Tangled a watch and join us next time for Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics.